Okay, we are going to resume proceedings. The question is that Amendment 60A be agreed to, and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 60A in the name of Douglas Ross is yes 26, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Minister Jim Fairley to press or withdraw Amendment 60. Minister.
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 60 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 60 in the name of Jim Fairley is yes 81, no 26. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 148 in the name of... So it is agreed. Right. The result on Amendment 60 in the name of Jim Fairley is yes 81, no 26. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call Amendment 148 in the name of Douglas Ross, already debated with Amendment 60. Douglas Ross to move on up with. The question is that Amendment 148 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 148 in the name of Douglas Ross is yes 24, no 82. There were no abstentions. That amendment is not agreed. I call Amendment 149 in the name of Douglas Ross, already debated with Amendment 60. Douglas Ross to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 149 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 149 in the name of Douglas Ross is yes 25, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 150 in the name of Douglas Ross, already debated with Amendment 60. Douglas Ross, to move or not move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 150 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 150 in the name of Douglas Ross is yes 25, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 151 in the name of Douglas Ross, already debated with Amendment 60. Douglas Ross, to move or not move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 151 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 151 in the name of Douglas Ross is yes 24, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 152 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 60. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not? Moved. The question is that Amendment 152 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 152 in the name of Rachel Hamilton is yes 39, no 66. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Takes us to Group 12, Scallops. I call Amendment 153 in the name of Emma Harper. Group with Amendment 154, Emma Harper, to move Amendment 153 and speak to both amendments in the group. Ms Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In recognising that Finlay Carson's original amendment and variations thereafter have sought to address some of the red tape around the routes for clean scallop shells to be repurposed and taken out of the waste stream, my amendment number 153 seeks to ensure that clear formal guidance is produced to help tackle any confusion and ensure a workable route to the market and further use of scallop shells where properly treated and responsibly managed. And ahead of this amendment, folk were asking me, well, what are you using scallop shells for? But they're made of calcium carbonate, so they can be used for various things like helping put aggregate for filling the roads. They can be used as a liming agent for changing acidity in soil. They can be used for feeding chickens, for instance. So think about this, calcium carbonate is what scallop shells are actually made of. So there is a way to maybe look at how we manage the waste shells so that when they're properly treated and responsibly managed. So my amendment will require ministers to issue and publish detailed guidance within 1 year of the provision coming into force. Ministers will be required to consult the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, Food Standards Scotland and other appropriate bodies or persons before any guidance is issued. SEPA would be required to have due regard to this guidance. And an example of what could be contained in the guidance was put to me was that perhaps such as no more than 1,500 tonnes of shells would be permitted for temporary storage. So I know that some individuals and businesses in the sector, including those in the South Scotland region that I represent, have highlighted issues with regards to dealing with large stockpiles of cleaned scallop shells, particularly with storage. In response, I have engaged with SEPA and the Scottish Government to discuss these issues, and I know they are working with businesses and individuals to agree straightforward ways of resolving issues with large stockpiles of scallop shells within the existing legal framework. SEPA has also advised that they are working directly with seafood producers to explore new markets for scallop shells and support access to those and help to resolve issues around temporary storage. They are trying to reduce administrative burdens to a minimum for those who are managing shells properly, which is something we all want to see, not least businesses like West Coast Sea Products in my region. And I'd like to put my thanks to them on the record for their engagement on this issue. I am aware, though, that West Coast Sea Products already have markets for their shells. That's not their particular issue. But whilst we can all agree that those who are managing shells don't need onerous authorisation conditions, it is still crucial that there are conditions in place to ensure that they are managed properly to avoid environmental harm, including odour and pest issues, which I don't think any of our constituents would thank us for. My understanding is Mr Finlay Carson's amendment number 154 does not allow for these safeguards. I have also engaged with SOCI, the South Scotland Enterprise, to ask SOCI to help West Coast Sea Products as well in any way they can with advice or funding as part of ways of addressing this as well. In addition, I note that in their report on the delegated powers that were added to the bill at stage 2, the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee found in relation to Mr Carson's stage 2 amendment that I quote, "The proposed power appears unnecessary in many respects and legally unworkable in others. The committee therefore recommends that an alternative solution to the issue the amendment seeks to address be found." So I believe that my amendment, if passed, will fully address all of these concerns with Mr Carson's original amendment that were raised by the committee at stage 2 and addresses similar concerns with Amendment 154. So I move amendment number 153, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Harper. I now call on Finlay Carson to speak to Amendment 154 and the other amendment in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'll address Amendment 153 lodged by Emma Harper and why a guidance-only approach cannot deliver the practical change stakeholders, particularly processors, need. Guidance does not change the law. It is non-binding. Regulators only need to have regard to it. The statutory framework, licensing, storage and transport rules, documentations, they all remain exactly the same. Processors have been clear. Guidance will not cut costs, reduce red tape or remove uncertainty. Day-to-day decisions will rest on case-by-case interpretation with all the inconsistencies that entails. Because guidance is non-binding, it can also introduce regional variations, leaving businesses unsure when planning investment, managing seasonal peaks or managing supply chains. And without statutory definition, especially when a material is a by-product rather than a waste, the core issues persist. The same permits, the same transport requirements, the same storage restrictions. Markets need legal assurances, not suggestions. Agriculture, construction, restoration and craft sectors will not accept secondary material unless their legal status is clear. For all these reasons, and in line with what processors have told me directly, guidance-only amendments risk the appearance of progress while leaving the regulatory burden intact. If Parliament wants less costs, less bureaucracy and less uncertainty, it must deliver statutory change, not non-binding guidance. I'm disappointed that Emma Harper, representing the south of Scotland and businesses along the Solway, has chosen to try and overturn my Stage 2 amendment, which was passed by the committee, supported by Labour, the Greens and Liberal Democrats. But she has the opportunity, of course, to make amends and stand up for her constituents, those who have given their opinion to her, I know, by supporting my revised, improved amendments, which I will now turn to. But I'll give way to Emma Harper.
Emma Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr Carson, for giving way. I am standing up for constituents. I believe my understanding is that the amendment that you put forward was just made it more complicated. Sorry, Presiding Officer. The member's amendment makes the legislation more complicated, which would make it more onerous. And if we put guidance into the legislation, it means that the guidance is statutory, and that means SEPA would have due regard to follow the guidance that the ministers would create. Isn't that what this amendment is all about?
Yeah. Finlay Carson.
I'm not suggesting that guidance isn't a bad thing, but it doesn't go as far as the processors that I've certainly had conversations with. Now on to my amendment, and I want to thank colleagues from across the chamber, other than the SNP, who supported the principle at Stage 2. Members recognise that Scotland's coastal communities deserve better than legal uncertainty and bureaucratic delay. And I do thank the Cabinet Secretary for engaging constructively. While we could not agree that guidance would deliver the required changes, the new amendment that I've submitted as 154 addresses the shortcomings that the Cabinet Secretary identified. And some of the shortcomings that Emma Harper has identified, but these have been addressed in this new amendment. So let me be crystal clear about what the amendment does. It states that clean, tissue-free scallop shells, inert, stable, widely used, can be treated as a by-product when established Article 5 test is met. It permits proportionate, time-limited, temporary storage, movement or aggregation of these shells without a full environmental authorisation, provided operators keep simple records. It recognises genuine established markets for these shells, soil improvement, landscaping, water filtration and coastal restoration. It retains full ministerial powers to set standards, require traceability and labelling, and consult SEPA, APHA, FSS and local authorities. This is not deregulation, as Emma Harper would suggest. It's better regulation, smarter, proportionate and rooted in the principles of the circular economy. We cannot claim to be serious about circularity while treating a clean, reusable material like hazardous waste, nor can we keep telling processors and community projects to wait for further regulation while they face costs, delays and uncertainty. Article 5 already provides a robust, legally tested definition of a by-product. Scotland uses it across environmental regulation. It works. This amendment brings that clarity into primary legislation, not now, not years from now. I beg your pardon, it brings it into legislation now, not years from now. And to be clear, what it does not do, it does not weaken public health, it does not touch food safety rules, it does not change the status of shells with residual tissue. Those remain Category 3 animal by-products. This applies only to clean tissue-free shells and it adds clarity, it does not dilute it. This Parliament often speaks about empowering coastal communities, cutting unnecessary red tape and delivering that circular economy. This amendment puts those words into action. It removes a disproportionate regulatory hurdle, supports restoration and biodiversity projects already relying on shells and creates value from a material that would otherwise be a cost, while keeping safeguards and ministerial oversight firmly in place. Presiding Officer, this is a practical win for coastal communities, a policy win for circular economy and a legislative win over clarity and confusion. I urge members to support my amendment and give Scotland's shellfish processors, buyers and the projects they deliver the certainty they deserve.
Thank you. And I call the Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. So I understand why these amendments have been brought forward by Emma Harper and Finlay Carson, and I'm grateful to both of them for their engagement on this matter. I want to be clear that, as I said at stage 2, I'm very supportive of the idea of using products such as scallop shells as part of a circular economy. As I explained to Finlay Carson when we met on the 13th of January, waste and waste disposal is already subject to existing legislative provision, including in relation to by-product conditions and end-of-waste conditions, which derive predominantly from EU law and are regulated by SEPA. And I recognise that Finlay Carson's amendments attempted to remove some of the perceived complexities of the process of bringing clean, tissue-free scallop shells to market or transferring shells for another use. But in reality, I do believe, and we have discussed this with the regulators, would add to confusion. That's because it duplicates provisions already provided under current waste legislation and lacks the current safeguards provided. I will, yes.
Finlay Carson.
I think rather than duplication, it just restates the current legislation. It doesn't duplicate it, and that's not unusual in legislation.
Cabinet Secretary.
I think restates and duplication is the same thing, personally. But I mean, the effect of the amendment is that you would not require an environmental authorisation, so no conditions could be imposed in relation to storage, no conditions could be imposed in respect of the transfers of shells, and obviously that if the regulation power is given to Scottish ministers, this means that any regulations made using this power could not provide for the enforcement of any requirements or give any body like SEPA or local authorities any powers of enforcement, and I think that's a flaw in the amendment. So, without these safeguards in place, Finlay Carson's amendment could lead to increased environmental harm, lack of enforcement and regulation. The use of these shells is not regulated properly. We could be looking at a number of issues, and I'm sure that most people who are storing them are storing them correctly. But of course, you know, we make regulation for a level playing field across everyone. So we could have smell problems, pest problems, and I really was genuinely hopeful. If I can make my points, Mr. Carson, then I'll bring you in. I really was hopeful that I could work with Finlay Carson on a workable amendment. So I do think that Emma Harper's amendment would ensure that current safeguards are protected. And I'll take Finlay Carson now.
Finlay Carson, briefly.
And I think the Cabinet Secretary is misrepresenting this. It's quite clear throughout my amendment that this only refers to clean, tissue-free shells. That doesn't have the smell or environmental issues that shells that are not being treated to avoid that. And that's quite clear right through my amendment.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, I recognise that, but obviously I'm getting advice on this from those that have the current regulations in place. And I know from both yourself and conversations that we have had, and also with Emma Harper, is that SEPA have been discussing this with the people who have made representations to both of you throughout this process, and they're taking on board some of the complexities that people have said have been overly burdensome. So Emma Harper's amendment, if I can move on to that, would ensure current safeguards are protected, avoid any interference and confusion that would arise from duplicating existing legislation. It offers a viable means of addressing the concerns over so-called red tape by committing to issue clear and informative guidance to SEPA in relation to by-product and end-of-waste conditions for scallop shells, so as to simplify matters and help processors do the right thing. And for these reasons, I'm afraid I cannot support Finlay Carson's amendment, and I must ask the Chamber to consider supporting Emma Harper's amendment instead. Thank you.
Thank you. A call on Emma Harper to wind up. Press to withdraw Amendment 153.
Thank you, President Officer. I won't take long. I absolutely care about coastal communities. The South Scotland region is huge, and there's a lot of coast on the east and the west, and I wholeheartedly care about the communities that I look after. Whilst I appreciate the motivation behind Mr Carson's amendment, I would urge members not to support it, as it will do little more than add complexity and duplication to the existing legal framework, and it will do so at the risk of actually causing environmental harm. For these reasons, I am asking that Mr Carson considers not pressing his amendment. I do want to thank the Cabinet Secretary and officials for working with me on this. I learned so much at an online meeting that we had in order to lay out the whole issues around end of waste and by-product and how we can clarify that for everybody involved. And it's not just the south-west of Scotland processors. There's processors in the north as well that are having seen, and they've made workable arrangements already. So my amendment will serve to cut through some of the complexity that may exist in the current process of managing scallop shells as part of the circular economy, whilst ensuring authorisation conditions necessary to ensure that there is no adverse environmental impact, and I would urge members to please support my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Harper. I take it you are pressing your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pressing.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 153 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 153 in the name of Emma Harper is yes 89, no 16. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 154 in the name of Finlay Carson, already debated with amendment 153. Finlay Carson to move or not move?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Move. The question is that amendment 154 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. Point. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Craig Hoy. Mr Hoy, you have voted, if that's what you're... Well, he's gone somewhere. Point of order, Ros McCall. Ms McCall, was your microphone on when you made that contribution? Could we have Ms McCall's microphone, please? Is Ms McCall's card in?
Yes, it is. There we go.
Perfect.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't connect. I'd have voted yes.
Thank you very much. Your vote will be recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 154 in the name of Finlay Carson is yes 43, no 64. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We now turn to Group 13 on agricultural subsidies. I call Amendment 155 in the name of Jamie Halker-Johnson, grouped with Amendments 156, 157, 158 and 169. And I call on Jamie Halker-Johnson to move Amendment 155 and to speak to all amendments of the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I first remind members of my register of interest as a partner in a farming business and as a member of the NFUS and Scottish Land and Estates. The Scottish Government, through the Rural Support Improvement Miscellaneous Amendments, Scotland No. 2 Regulations 2025, removed 2 exemptions which allowed a number of farms not to put ecological focus areas into place, and this is the focus of my Amendment 155. This will have the effect of increasing the number of farm businesses required to put an EFA in place. But in the islands, this will be particularly disproportionate, rising from 15 island farm businesses who currently are eligible to an estimated 282 in the first year as set out in the Island Communities Impact Assessment, with future changes impacting even further, potentially to unsustainable levels, certainly according to the concerns of some local farmers. Island farms face particular difficulties with implementing EFAs, and this is why they have benefited from the position where very few have been involved in the past. This amendment would reapply the 2 former 75% exemptions exclusively to farm businesses on inhabited islands. Noting the challenges of implementation, it would also reduce the level of holding required to be under an EFA for those small number of farms that are eligible from 7% back down to 5%. This is a relatively small change in terms of affected hectares, but avoids the massively disproportionate impact this change will have on island communities who are least able to implement it. Amendments 156 and 157 and 158, also my name, are amendments aimed to establish transparency around the operation of the Future Farming Investment Scheme and any similar funds that are established for environmental farming support. Members won't need reminding about the anger that surrounded the launch of this scheme, and we know, for example, that almost half of applicants were considered ineligible before even being considered. When the Minister has been challenged on this, his answer is that he doesn't know whether these applications were ever reviewed by a human or not. Amendment 156 deals with the broad issue of the operation of these schemes, requiring data to be published, providing a credible overview of the operation of such schemes. And that's vital if we're not only to fix the FFIS, but to ensure that this sort of chaos does not happen again with future schemes. The amendment requires the publication of data which is relatively straightforward and would assist in public understanding of the scheme, as well as supporting the applicant understanding of the scheme. Amendment 157 addresses the issue at the level of individual applicant. It reflects the words of the Cabinet Secretary, who indicated in committee that applicants may wish to contact their local ARPID office if they wanted to know why an application has been rejected. If the Cabinet Secretary is satisfied to give this advice, I would suggest that she also make it clear by supporting this amendment that applicants will have the right to access this information in this way. Amendment 158 is a consequential amendment which provides safeguards for protected and confidential data. Just turning very briefly to Douglas Ross's Amendment 169, this amendment covers similar ground to my Amendment 156, requiring transparency around the operation of FSIS, with an annual report containing information about the nature of the applications. Some of the differences include a specific requirement to recognise whether internal consultants or computerised programmes were used and potential learning from the Scottish Government. There's also a requirement to consult persons with the knowledge, expertise and experience of farming and agriculture, and to inform all applicants who were either rejected or ineligible for the reasons their application was not accepted. And I would urge members to support this amendment as well, and I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Mr Halker-Johnson. I now call on Douglas Ross to speak to Amendment 169 and other amendments of the group. Mr Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I am very pleased to move and speak to this amendment because I think it's crucially important. And I'll start where I started in committee when I moved this amendment. I welcome the quantum of funds that went to farmers and crofters and the scheme. You know, it would be churlish to turn away and dismiss the significant investment. But something went wrong here. No one can tell me that they believe this scheme was a success when 47% of applicants, and let's remember over 7,500 people applied for this scheme, 47% were not rejected, were deemed ineligible. If you have a scheme where almost 1 in every 2 are deemed to be ineligible before even being considered, there's a problem with your scheme. There's a problem with how it's articulated, how people are invited to apply for it, or how it is reviewed when it comes back in again. And this has been the subject of considerable debate in this Parliament, be it questions in the Chamber, be it the Stage 2 amendments, be it the members' business debate that we had less than a week ago. And it has come from all sides of the Chamber. Liberal Democrats put forward the members' business last week. Labour MSPs have been raising this here in this chamber and their MP colleagues in the House of Commons, and the Conservatives have been regularly seeking updates and answers on this point. Because what has gone from what should have been a positive has turned into a negative for the government, and really risks undermining the thought process that people will go through should they have the opportunity to apply for a scheme in the future. Because months on, they are still unsure what happened here. They do not know why their application, which they spent a lot of time on, was either rejected or deemed ineligible. And I would have thought it is just a basic courtesy to say to people who are applying for funds that they believe are vital for their farming or crofting operation, to tell them why they weren't successful. Was it because too many people applied for the same thing? Was it because their geographical area had been oversubscribed and some people had to be rejected and others were fortunate? And what happened to these ineligible applications? The Minister has outlined, both in letters and in written answers, a series of reasons he believes applications were rejected. Many of these have been dismissed by those in the industry. And when we speak about the industry, I'm sure the Minister or the Cabinet Secretary responding to this group will say, well, this scheme was co-designed by the National Farmers Union. The same National Farmers Union that said this. Initial feedback from our members has focused around perceived inconsistencies. So I know many members in here won't like to take this information from me or these Conservative benches. They might not even like to hear it from any of the opposition benches. But don't ignore the representative body of our farmers in this country who were involved in the scheme but are saying something went badly wrong here. And this is important so we don't repeat these mistakes in the future. It's important to insert confidence back into the system. So people unhappy about not getting a grant is understandable. But now wary about applying in the future is unacceptable. If there is money available, we should be encouraging our new entrants, our tenant farmers, those in island communities, to apply for them, as they were encouraged as priority groups in this scheme. And then they were left with nothing. Not the money they had looked for the investment that they needed, and crucially, not the answers to the questions that they have been posing. I want to highlight a point that, again, no doubt will come in summing up. Ministers will say they promised at Stage 2 to provide all of the information required. That was a commitment made by the Cabinet Secretary, Marie Goujon, at committee. She was very clear. We don't need to support amendments like this because material is going to be provided before recess, which was at that point just a couple of weeks away. At that point, I tried to intervene, and so did others, but Rhoda Grant, for the Labour Party, made a very, very telling intervention. She said this: "There is a huge amount of concern about this, and there have been statements and questions on it. But what we do not seem to have is any better information, and I think that there is a lack of confidence that that information will come out. So she asked Marie Goujon, when does the Cabinet Secretary plan to publish the paper that she's referred to? And Rhoda Grant continued, an opposition politician from me, but speaking about my amendment, says, I'm minded to support these amendments because I am not confident that we will get the answers. Is there any way back from this to ensure that if what is in the paper is not good enough, people can still get the information that they need? Well, I think it's very clear that the information that was ultimately published by the Cabinet Secretary was not good enough, because people still do not have the answers they are looking for. And I've quoted Rhoda Grant in the hope of garnering Labour support. I've mentioned Liam MacArthur in the hope of garnering Liberal Democrat support. And now I come to one of my favourite members on the SNP benches, Christine Graham, because she took part. I can see she is overwhelmed by that. But she took part in the members' debate less than a week ago on the future. Yes, I know. Well, if I can finish my point, then I'll give way to Christine. If I can,
is Mr. Ross calling an intervention?
I am in a moment. If I can finish my point, because I highlight Christine Graham because she took part in the members' business on the Future Farming Investment Scheme less than a week ago, and she said this: "What is missing is a breakdown by parliamentary region and more detailed data on new entrants, farm types and so on for both successful and unsuccessful applicants." And at that time I urged Christine Graham to support my amendments this week, because actually in Amendment 169 Part 4, Part A and B, I'm calling for information for all applicants whose application was rejected for the reasons of the application being rejected, and inform all applications who were considered ineligible the reason why they were considered ineligible. So I don't know if we've got some telepathic relationship going on, but before Christine Graham even uttered those words last Thursday, I had lodged an amendment which would achieve exactly what she was calling for. And perhaps when she was seeking to intervene, she was going to tell me that she's going to support my Amendment 169. So I'll give way on that point. Christine Graham.
Well, I'll take this opportunity, if I may, Deputy Presiding Officer, instead of being called, I'm going to actually speak to that. Is this an intervention?
Ms Graham, I think this is an intervention, and then a speech is a different.
I'll leave it till I get called, if that's convenient.
Thank you.
And I'll address
Ross.
OK, the member had asked to intervene, but the suspense I can handle for a few more minutes. But I say this genuinely. There is nothing in this amendment that SNP members should be concerned about. There is nothing in here, to go back to Christine Graham's questions on my Gull amendments, there's nothing in here that costs any money to the government. I've gone through it very carefully since the last group. There's nothing in here that any SNP member representing a rural or island constituency couldn't proudly go back to their constituency and say, I supported Amendment 169 to get the answers for our crofters, our farmers and our tenants. I cannot understand why SNP ministers wouldn't want to be open and transparent about a scheme that many of us are positive about what it delivered for those who were successful, but do have questions about those who were not. I'm going to finish, Presiding Officer, if I can, with a quote from a constituent who I quoted in committee, but I do think deserves to be quoted in the chamber, because this constituent from Murray was involved in many of the applicants who applied from my area as an agent seeking to get the best for those she was working with. And she said this: "The biggest red flag and huge concern to the industry is the 3,537 applications that did not meet the eligibility criteria. We need more information on this, and we need it whilst the civil servants who have dealt with this scheme are still in their current jobs." She continued, "I simply do not believe that 47% of applicants were ineligible. I do not believe that is possible. I do, on the other hand, believe that the people, or possibly AI, although this has been point-blank denied in Parliament, doing the scoring, did not have the correct training or information available to make these assessments." And she finished by saying, "We need a breakdown of why each ineligible application was ineligible. And if the government refused to provide this, then that raises greater concerns on transparency and the accuracy of the assessment system." I don't want to see these concerns continued any longer. The Government have an opportunity to ensure accuracy and transparency within this system. They can back my amendment and the amendments from Jamie Halcrow-Johnson to finally put this issue to bed, to accept where errors have been made, to make improvements going forward, to restore trust into a system that is clearly needing trust to be reintroduced to it, because there remain far too many questions about this scheme. It is not going to go away. There will be more questions to the Minister. There will be more members' business. There will be more questions raised, I'm sure, at hustings in the coming weeks and months ahead of the election. Therefore, would it not be better for all of us across the political spectrum to support these amendments to get the answers for our constituents who have been calling for them for so long? Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I call Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I don't demur from anything I said in that debate. I meant what I said, and I said what I meant, and anyone can have a look at it. It's a wonderful contribution. However, I don't think it's appropriate to put it in amendment form in legislation. There are so many ways to deal with this that are available, and I've said this in other amendment procedures. There's committees that could undertake to ensure an inquiry going into this, serious parliamentary questions, debates. To me, that is the way one deals with ensuring that this does what it said in the tin. And there may be very innocent reasons why some of it went wrong. I agree, 46%. You say, how on earth did that happen? But it may be simply that in a rush to it's anecdotal, rush to get ahead of the queue, quickly filled in the form, went in, incorrectly completed. And the member knows that during the debate I raised the issue of the guidance that was on the website. I raised the issue about what actually had been rejected, and there was a very helpful answer from the Minister to a question by Liam MacArthur on the 6th of December, which listed some of the reasons. But then no farmer or tenant is actually going to be looking at parliamentary answers. So I do think that this is a relatively simple matter. I understand for a busy minister to cure and to ensure that when we come around next time, and you agree it's a good fund, it was almost doubled in size because of demand, which is a good thing, but if there is concern that the assessments were not handled properly, there was an inequality in it, well, let's see that. That's all it is. All I'm saying to the member is, I don't think you put that in primary legislation. Yes, I will give way. Douglas Ross.
I'm very grateful to Christine Graham, and in some ways I agree with that. Primary legislation is not perhaps the best way to do this. But I hope she would also agree that there have been the parliamentary questions that she has suggested. I and other members have written individually to the Minister on behalf of individual constituents. The committee has discussed this at stage 2. Having gone through all of those options and still not got the answers, does she understand why there has been these amendments put forward? But would she also accept my proposal, through her in an intervention to the Minister, that if we were to get a commitment to do what is in these amendments without the need to force this to a vote, I would not press my amendment?
Christine Graham. Well, of course, I don't speak for the Minister. I leave the Minister to deal with that. I won't be here next session and retiring, but neither will the member. But if that isn't progressed, the next Parliament, the committee members, can ensure this is followed through. Because I say to the member, if I were here next session, I would be pursuing this if the Minister had not come through with it. Because it's not a big deal. It's a simple thing to explain to people who are upset and disappointed. Why am I upset and disappointed? Where did I go wrong? Is there something better in the guidance that could be done? So I don't rush and put my application in to be rejected on ineligibility or on the checking that went on afterwards. Because I seem to recall, and the Minister will correct me undoubtedly, that some people were claiming twice for certain items. That's the thing that has to be cleared up. So I leave it at that. Everything that is there we said in the debate, I supported it, but I do not believe it is appropriate in primary legislation.
Thank you, Ms Graham. I call the Minister, Jim Fairley.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'll start with Amendment 155 from Jamie Halcrow-Johnston. That seeks to use this bill to reverse the progress that we have made elsewhere. And progress has been made with the industry and changes that are being put in place for farm support to put us in better shape to deliver for nature and climate and for what is expected from the market. And I have been clear that we will maintain our investment in our producers with direct payments to underpin the resilience of those feeding our nation. but in return it's right that we expect them to do more for nature and for climate outcomes in return. So I'd ask the member that he takes that into account and he doesn't press this amendment. Amendments 155, 156, 157 and 169 relating to the reporting arrangements for the Future Farming Investment Scheme and the wide environmental farming schemes were lodged at stage 2. So I can assure the members that I understand the concerns behind the amendments and that we are taking steps to address them. However, I do not think that creating statutory reporting duties to these schemes is either necessary or proportionate. To introduce measures would add administrative costs and burdens to the scheme, for which much of the information sought in these amendments has already been published. I'll take Douglas Ross.
Douglas Ross.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way, and this is a genuine offer. If he were to stand up and agree to either publish all the information of those rejected or deemed ineligible, or to invite those who wish to have that information to receive it either from their local office or from the Scottish Government, I wouldn't press my Amendment 169. Is that something he would consider? So those who were rejected or deemed ineligible finally get the answers to why they were rejected or deemed ineligible.
Minister.
Well, I very much look forward to the fact that Mr Ross won't press his amendment, because we've already put a detailed assessment documentation explaining eligibility, verification, scoring and ranking. It was all published before Christmas. We've also said to people who have got concerns about it that they can contact their RPID office and they will give them an explanation as to what it is that they have done individually. So I'm not going to take any more amendments from Mr Ross. We've discussed this and we've debated it endlessly. An individual applicant for the scheme, we've already said, can discuss that with their RPID office and discuss why their applications were unsuccessful. For those reasons, I'm going to ask the members not to press these amendments today, and if they're pressed, I'd ask them not to be supported.
Thank you, Minister. And I call Jamie Halcrow-Johnson to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 155.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I take it from the Minister's last comments there that the Government will be therefore supporting my Amendment 157, which calls for information to be available from RPID, as advised by the Cabinet Secretary, who said in committee, if individuals have any queries about their own specific applications, I encourage them to go to their RPID office and try and garner that information. I take it, therefore, given that is the nature of my Amendment 157, the Government will be supporting that. I'm happy to take an intervention if you want to clarify that.
Minister.
The amendments that the member is putting forward are utterly unnecessary, because we've already done all the things that have been asked for. So we will not be supporting his amendments.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
I imagine myself, Douglas Ross, Tim Eagle, I'm sure members across this chamber who have farming communities may well be interested to see the response we get in our inbox if, when farmers hear that the government have already done all that they said they were going to do. I think that, of course I will.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way. Does he think, therefore, it would be helpful to the Government's case to outline to Parliament how many of the 7,500 applicants have sought this information? We know that 47% of those, so 3,500, were deemed ineligible. Have 3,500 people already requested this information because the Minister is saying it's available, or is the true figure actually closer to zero? Because that sounds like the feedback we are getting from our constituents.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
I think that would be very helpful indeed. Whether those of our constituents who might apply for that information would have any confidence in getting the information they seek is another thing coming. Because I think that's one of the key issues around this whole situation. It's a lack of confidence in how it's been rolled out. Douglas Ross highlighted the frustration of farmers, and that is very much the case. The Minister talked about the administrative burdens and costs of providing this information, but we're ignoring the time and effort that farmers had to put in at a very busy time of year into these applications, and not just farmers, but also all those suppliers that were required to provide quotes and sometimes look at re-quoting on areas. And that's why my amendments 156 and 157 and Douglas Ross's amendment are so important. The Minister also talked about the information that had been received. The paper had been promised at committee, but the update, as it was snuck out on the last day before recess, a day after this Parliament had broken up, on the last day of chamber business, so there wasn't the opportunity to actually scrutinise it then. I am surprised that the Government appears not to be supportive of 157. As I said, it was the advice of the Cabinet Secretary. The Minister has suggested that this is what somebody can do. It does seem an odd approach to say take this approach, but actually we're not going to make sure you can do it legislatively. And in terms of my Amendment 155, which is in relation to greening, I recognise that the progress is being made, but the Minister met with farmers from Orkney who I brought down, or who came down to Parliament. I hosted a meeting with them, and they put their concerns, their issues, to the Minister in person. They laid out the impact that this is going to have in communities like ours. And the Minister will not be unaware of the implications of these changes, and that's why I brought Amendment 155 forward. On that basis, I will finish there and I will press.
Thank you, Mr Halker-Johnson. The question is that Amendment 155 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament has not agreed. Excuse me. There will be a division and members should cast a vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 155 in the name of Jamie Halker-Johnson is yes 28, no 78. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 156 in the name of Jamie Halker-Johnson. Ready to debate with Amendment 155. Jamie Halker-Johnson to move or not move?
Move.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 156 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 156 in the name of Jamie Halker-Johnson is yes 42, no 65. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I now call Amendment 157 in the name of Jamie Halker-Johnson. Ready to debate with Amendment 155. Jamie Halker-Johnson to move or not move? Thank you. The question is that Amendment 157 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 157 in the name of Jamie Halker-Johnson is yes 44, no 64. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 158 in the name of Jamie Halker-Johnson. Ready to debate with amendment 155. Jamie Halker-Johnson to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call amendment 61 in the name of Mercedes Villalba. Ready to debate with amendment 141. Mercedes Villalba to move or not move?
Move.
Move. The question is that amendment 61 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 61 in the name of Mercedes Villalba is yes 19, no 81. There were 7 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 159 in the name of Beatrice Wishart. Already debate with amendment 141. Beatrice Wishart to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. Thank you. I now call amendment 160 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with amendment 142. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 160 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast a vote now. Vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 160 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 46, no 62. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I now call amendment 164 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with amendment 141. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Not moving 164.
Not moved. I call amendment 165 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with amendment 141. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 165 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. Who's voting against us? Vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 165 in the name of Willie Rennie is yes 99, no 8. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I now call amendment 166 in the name of John Mason. Already debated with amendment 141. John Mason to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 166 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast a vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 166 in the name of John Mason is yes 23, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We now turn to Group 14 on Muirburn and wildfire management. I call amendment 167 in the name of Tim Eagle, grouped with amendments 62, 42, 43, 161 and 163. I call on Tim Eagle to move amendment 167 and to speak to all amendments of the group. Mr Eagle.
I move amendment 167. Members may remember my arguments on the creation of a wildfire response unit from stage 2 of this bill and stage 3 of the Land Reform Scotland bill. And here I am once again trying again because so serious this is. My new amendment 167 requires ministers to review the ability of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to respond to wildfires. And if they found that there was not sufficient resources, which I would argue there are not, then ministers would be required to set up a wildfire response unit. As I have currently put on the record, during the damaging wildfires at Carbridge and Darther in the Cairngorms last summer, many businesses and land managers were involved in tackling those wildfires. The devastation and scale of those fires was immense. They are considered to have been the largest such wildfires in Scottish history, and they burned more than 11,000 hectares of moorland and forestry. I remain incredibly grateful to the communities and to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service for coming out in support during that time. However, I believe much more needs to be done to provide the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service with vehicles, aerial support, commanders with enhanced authority and so on. But these fires are going to become an annual feature in the Highlands, and I want to ensure that the SFRS is properly funded to respond. I will say this possibly for the final time this parliamentary term. The fires we are seeing are incredibly powerful and deeply worrying for local communities. It seems to me only a matter of time before it is not just Open Moor that is affected, but a fire will hit a town or village. I urge this Parliament to act now rather than wait for any future disaster. I also bring forward in this group 2 amendments on Muirburn, following on from my arguments at stage 2 of the bill and stage 3 of the Land Reform Scotland bill. In 2024, the Scottish Parliament, as many will remember, passed the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Act, which prevents anyone from making muirburn on land without first acquiring a licence. Following 2 delays due to stakeholder concerns, the licensing scheme is due to come into force this year. The effect of that might be fewer people are able to make muirburn, or that people will stop muirburn altogether, curtailing work that is obviously necessary to prevent disasters from taking place again. I believe that licensing will only make it harder for skilled land managers to carry out preventative muirburn. That will mean an increase in combustible fuel loads and potentially the loss of those in the industry who played such a vital role in containing recent fires. My Amendment 162 would therefore repeal part of the Muirburn licensing scheme conditions from the 2024 Act. That is, the conditions related to applications for making muirburn on peatland. It would mean that all land, whether peatland or not, would be subject to the same conditions where a licence is to be considered. Now, I don't expect that to get support today. And if the government can't do that, then perhaps they will at least agree with my Amendment 163, which would require ministers to undertake a review of the impact of the licensing scheme on wildfire management, including consulting with the SFRS and other appropriate authorities. And if the licensing scheme is found to have a harmful effect, then these sections must not be brought into force. All I am asking for is a review to try and protect us in the future. Now, turning to other amendments in this group, the Scottish Conservatives are very happy to support Emma Roddick's MSP's Amendment 62 that introduces the power for local authorities to issue a fixed penalty notice relating to the prevention or suppression of wildfires, and I am grateful to her for bringing that forward. And we are also content to support Beatrice Wishhart's MSP's Amendment 42 and 43, which seek to introduce an approved training course and to allow muirburn on peatland. And I confirm that we will be supporting my colleague Edward Mountain MSP's amendments on muirburn licences, which I will leave him to set out in more depth. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Eagle. Before I call the next speaker, I would advise members that they will note that we will shortly reach the next time limit, and we still have this and one more group to debate in this timeline. As a consequence, under Rule 9.8.5a, I am minded to accept a motion without notice to propose that the next time limit be extended by 30 minutes. I call on Minister for Parliamentary Business to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that the time limit by which the debate on groups 12 to 15 must end be extended by 30 minutes. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is agreed. I would also take this opportunity to advise members that we will just seek to continue the business and crack on and are not planning any comfort breaks at this stage. I now turn to Emma Roddick. I call Emma Roddick to speak to Amendment 62 and other amendments in the group. Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My Amendment 62 will allow ministers to introduce by regulations fixed penalty schemes in relation to any bylaws that are introduced by local authorities to prevent wildfires. It also puts beyond doubt the ability of local authorities to make bylaws that are for the purpose of wildfire prevention and suppression. Wildfires, as we know all too well in the Highlands, can be devastating. They pose a deadly risk to life as well as rural businesses. Large amounts of carbon are released and biodiversity is put in danger as many species struggle to survive the flames. Many constituents wrote to me following the Dava Moor fire last year, suggesting various approaches that could prevent wildfires from taking hold, including things like banning disposable barbecue use during the summer months. The Cairngorms National Park Authority's new bylaws attracted a lot of support locally, and people asked why these were not being brought in elsewhere. Councils then told me that being unable to issue fixed penalty notices was a huge barrier. So I brought a similar amendment forward at stage 2, and I was pleased to get supportive comments from colleagues cross-party. I've since worked with the Government on the further development of this amendment, and I'm delighted that it is back again today, and I hope that members across the Chamber will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Roddick. I now call Beatrice Wishart to speak to Amendment 42 and other amendments in the group. Ms Wishart.
Thank you. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendments 42 and 43 are intended to make the Muirburn licensing framework more workable and clearer in practice. Under the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Act, there is now a requirement for all Muirburn practitioners to complete an approved training course. However, Bright Spark Burning Techniques, a provider of Muirburn training, and Scotland Land and Estates identified that completing an approved training course is not a licensable purpose for making Muirburn. Given the requirement to complete an approved training course with practical components, it seems that this is an oversight that should be corrected. Amendment 42 explicitly recognises training delivered as part of an approved course under the Act as a legitimate purpose for Muirburn on both peatland and non-peatland. It also allows Muirburn undertaken for training or research to take place outside the standard Muirburn season where that is genuinely required. The aim here is straightforward. Approved training courses currently have to rely on other licensable purposes in order to operate, which is neither transparent nor sustainable. These changes allow training and research to stand on their own footing while remaining subject to licensing and proper oversight. Amendment 42 also clarifies which Muirburn purposes may take place inside and outside the Muirburn season, providing greater certainty for practitioners and regulators alike. Amendment 43 addresses the additional test that currently applies to Muirburn on peatland. Removing the requirement to demonstrate that no other vegetation management method is practicable does not weaken safeguards. Applicants would still need to show that Muirburn is necessary for a specified purpose, and Nature Scot would retain full discretion in determining whether a licence should be granted. Importantly, alternatives such as cutting or grazing, which are not automatically benign, and the evidence on their impacts on peatlands remains uncertain. Taken together, these amendments support high-quality training, improve regulatory clarity and retain strong environmental oversight. I therefore ask members to support Amendments 42 and 43.
Thank you, Ms Wishart. I now call Edward Mountain to speak to Amendment 161 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I have one amendment in my name in this group, and I'm going to speak to that first before I speak to the others. Just would like to reiterate what's been said already. Wildfires are going to become more and more prevalent in Scotland. We've seen evidence of that over the years. And the wildfire that was on the Dava just last year was a massive event. For those of us who lived in the vicinity, I lived some 20 miles from it. I suffered from the smoke from it for a considerable period of time. And I visited the site soon afterwards, Presiding Officer, to see the extent of the damage. It was not just the moorland that was burned, but it was young trees, young plantations. And the damage to the environment and the species that lived there was immense. So, my amendment in this group is Amendment 161, which allows more Muirburn licences to be granted while retaining the oversight that SNH have. Now, as we know, the Muirburn licensing scheme is not yet in force, but it's due to be implemented ahead of the 26 and 27 season. The licensing scheme is underpinned by different legal thresholds for granting licences, depending on whether the land is peatland or non-peatland. To grant a licence on non-peatland, SNH only need to be satisfied that it's appropriate. However, on peatland, SNH need to be satisfied that it is appropriate to grant a licence and that mule burn is both necessary for the specified purpose and no other method of vegetation control is practical. Now, I understand Beatrice Wishart's amendment 43 is complementary, or my amendment is complementary to her amendment, however the way you want to look at it. But let's be clear. There is a great deal of nonsense talked about mule burn, about how it burns peat and deep into peat. It doesn't. A proper mule burn actually allows the fire to pass quite swiftly over the area, removing the dead vegetation and allowing vegetation to regrow. If you don't believe me, Presiding Officer, I would suggest a quick visit to Tongue would be useful to look at the peninsula up there, which accidentally was burnt in a large fire about 15 years ago, which covered a huge area of the Amoyne SSSI. The fire was very quick. The trees that were actually accidentally burnt as part of it did not all need replacing. In fact, the fences that were there didn't need replacing either. Most of the posts stood, although the galvanised on some of the actual fence wire was removed. So some of that was replaced. So it can be a very quick process. And the way it's been marketed in the past, and quite incorrectly, is that it goes down into the peat and burns the peat. It is a swift move over. So my amendment, whether it's complementary or to Beatrice or hers is complementary to mine, is replace the test of necessity with a test of appropriate. This would be more reasonable while retaining the oversight of SNH. Now, Presiding Officer, the Minister has taken great pains this evening to say that SNH are the right people to be carrying out licences. So if this is appropriate, then he should have no fear that SNH will not be extending beyond their remit and will only be issuing licences where it's appropriate. I would also just say, in speaking to the other amendments, an Amendment 42 that's been put forward by Beatrice Wishart, I totally support this. I've been doing mule burn, I guess, for 25 years. I still learn every time that I've been involved in it. It is a very complex and difficult thing to do properly. And what I would say is that when you have somebody who knows what they're doing, you can very easily control fires by backburning and therefore stopping the fire progressing. But that needs training. It also needs the use of the skills of people who've been doing it, which is why I support Amendment 42. The other issue that my colleague has brought up, Tim Eagle, is about equipment. Having the right equipment to fight wildfires is absolutely appropriate. And I've talked about this before in the Parliament, Presiding Officer, stressing that sometimes equipment, just for an Argo Cat, for example, with a sprayer, a fogger and the rest of the equipment, can be in excess of £40,000. And we need to make sure that that equipment is available and that our firefighters in Scotland are trained to use it in conjunction with those people that really understand wildfires, and that's the people who are working on the land, including gamekeepers. So I would like to hear the rest of the arguments, but that is why I think my amendment is so important, my Amendment 161, and why the government should get behind it and support it. Might get them out of a hole with the pickle they've got themselves in on mule burn licences. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Martin. I now call Minister Jim Fairley.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. As Tim Eagle and I have discussed previously, Siobhan Brown and myself have already committed to developing a Scottish Wildfire Strategic Action Plan, which will be informed by the Wildfire Summit that we had last year, the cross-sector engagement and the ministerial roundtable with MSPs, so that we're ensuring that cross-party input and transparency. This will include prevention, preparedness, response and recovery. It will also consider whether any legislative changes may be required to support the actions within it. So we're working at pace just now to develop this action plan in preparation for this year's wildfire season and beyond, and we're carefully considering everything in the round. So it's important that we don't preempt the outcomes from that. The ministerial priorities for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service are set out in the current Fire and Rescue Framework. This already includes the SFRS response capability and wildfires. There are formal governance and accountability arrangements which the Scottish Government already has in place to hold the service to account, and it would not be appropriate for ministers to tell SFRS how to tackle wildfires operationally. In addition, His Majesty's Inspectors for Fire Services in Scotland can already inspect and provide advice and recommendations if that is necessary. So the development of the Strategic Action Plan, coupled with the fact that the proposed amendment would place an unhelpful prescriptive duty on Scottish ministers who already carry out much of what is being proposed under business as usual, means that I would not support Mr Eagle's amendment and ask him not to press it. As Emma Roddick has already set out, our Amendment 62 would put beyond doubt the ability of local authorities to make bylaws aimed at preventing and suppressing wildfires. It would also enable the Scottish Government to make regulations for a fixed penalty notice regime to help enforce local authority bylaws aimed at the prevention of wildfires. I am aware that some local authorities have expressed an interest in developing fire management bylaws and, importantly, in having the fixed penalty notice powers to support that enforcement. But these enabling powers will include a requirement for Scottish ministers to consult local authorities and other interested parties before making regulations. But Emma Roddick's amendment provides a pathway for this, and I therefore support her amendment. I would also encourage members to support it as well. I'll take an intervention.
Edward Mountain.
I thank the Minister for taking an intervention. Presiding Officer, I too support Emma Roddick's amendment, but I'm intrigued to know who will actually issue these tickets for wildfires. Would it be rangers employed by local authorities? If so, the Minister must be concerned, as I am, that every local authority, apart from the Highland, has reduced the number of rangers that they employ over the period of the last 15 years.
Minister.
As I've already stated in what I was saying earlier, is local authorities who wish to actually have these bylaws and put them into place will be they'll be the ones who will decide how it is that they're going to do it. Amendments 42 and 43 in the name of Beatrice Wishart. They would formally include training as part of an approved training course under the 2024 Act as a purpose for Muirburn. They also clarify the circumstances in which different purposes may be carried out in relation to the Muirburn season, and to remove the requirement that NatureScot must be satisfied that no other practicable vegetation management method exists when considering licence applications for Muirburn on peatlands. As I've said previously, Muirburn is not a silver bullet, but it can play a role in both wildfire prevention and response. But we've got to strike the right balance between protecting our peatlands from the potential adverse impacts of Muirburn and avoiding the far more devastating consequences of uncontrolled wildfire. We've heard consistently from stakeholders across the spectrum about the importance of that high-quality training. These amendments allow approved training providers to provide These amendments allow approved training providers to deliver essential training within robust regulatory framework without widening the licence regime in a way that could be open to abuse. The additional clarity provided around permitted purposes and the timing of the Muirburn season is therefore a constructive and a practical improvement. I recognise that some members may have concerns about them removing the requirement to demonstrate that no other method of vegetation control is practicable before a licence for Muirburn peatland is granted. However, NatureScot still must be satisfied that any licence is necessary for the specified purpose, and the current evidence on the impacts of alternatives such as cutting or grazing on peatlands is inconclusive, meaning that they cannot automatically be assumed to be preferable. So for these reasons, I would encourage members to support Amendments 42 and 43. On Amendment 161 from Edward Mountain, that would make significant change to the legal test applied by NatureScot when determining whether to grant licences for Muirburn. Replacing the requirement that Muirburn be necessary with a lower threshold of appropriate would weaken the licensing test for burning on peatlands. That would reduce the decision-making bar and constrain rather than enhance NatureScot's ability to exercise robust regulatory judgment. The current necessity test enables NatureScot to authorise strategic and limited Muirburn, including where required for wildfire risk reduction, while still safeguarding our valuable peatlands, and importantly it gives NatureScot the discretion and the flexibility to assess necessity in the context of environmental conditions, emerging scientific evidence and the specific circumstances of each application. In addition, Nature Scot's Scientific Advisory Committee has recently reviewed and strengthened its position on muirburn in light of recent wildfire events. The conclusions of that review support the existing regulatory approach, and Amendment 161 does not align with that scientific advice. So for those reasons, I would encourage members to oppose Amendment 161. On Amendment 162, Tim Eagle's amendment goes further than Amendment 161 by removing additional safeguards that currently apply to muirburn on peatland. As a result, Nature Scot would be required to assess applications for muirburn on peatland using the same test as for land that is not peatland. As with Amendment 161, this would substantially weaken the bespoke protections that recognise peatlands as sensitive and nationally important habitats, and that undermines the additional scrutiny that is currently applied. I have already set in detail my response to Amendment 161, why reducing these safeguards is not appropriate and it would risk adverse environmental outcomes, so I will not repeat those arguments again, but for these reasons I urge members to oppose Amendment 162. Amendment 163 would require ministers to carry out a statutory review into the impact of the muirburn licensing scheme on wildfire management before the relevant provisions of the Act could be commenced. In practice, that risks delaying or even preventing the implementation of the legislation that Parliament has already considered and agreed. It would also introduce unnecessary uncertainty for land managers and regulators who want the clarity on the framework within which they operate, particularly given the fixed nature of the muirburn season. The amendment sets an overly rigid test by requiring non-commencement if any detrimental impact is identified, despite the reality that complex land management regimes involve trade-offs and context-specific effects. Crucially, the muirburn licensing scheme is designed to be adaptive and evidence-led. It allows Nature Scot to assess applications on a case-by-case basis and respond to emerging evidence over time. Preventing its commencement would delay the introduction of clearer oversight, safeguards and controls, potentially weakening rather than strengthening wildfire resilience. So for those reasons, I would urge members to oppose Amendment 160. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I call on Tim Eagle to wind up. Press or withdraw Amendment 167.
All I'm asking for here, Presiding Officer, is a review. That's all I want, is a review, just to check that our country is safe and that when wildfires happen, that people and communities are protected. Now, I'd be happy to believe the Minister in what he's just said. Go ahead.
Briefly, Minister.
Briefly. I absolutely do not contest the member's genuine desire for what he's looking for. But we've already got the wildfire strategic action plan. It's in place just now. We do not need this amendment.
Amigo.
Well, I was just about to go on to say, having not even been in this Parliament for 2 years yet, I am very conscious that this government is very good at words, but very poor at action. Scotland is light on the spectrum for wildfire response. Spain, Portugal and Canada already have all of this. Sweden is investing in a satellite-based real-time early detection system. Norway is looking at looking at options, already launching a wildfire initiative to put wildfires higher on the policy agenda. What were rare events are becoming predictable risks. We need, I believe, a dedicated seasonal wildfire team. But all I'm asking for here is for this Parliament to back a review. This is about making sure that Scotland really is taking that step further on the path which Nordic countries already seem to be on. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Pressing the amendment.
Yes.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 167 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. Votes closed. Result of the vote on Amendment 167 in the name of Tim Eagle is yes 41, no 64. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 168 in the name of Tim Eagle. Already debated with Amendment 141. Tim Eagle to move on up.
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 168 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 168 in the name of Tim Eagle is yes 43, no 63. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 169 in the name of Douglas Ross. Already debated with Amendment 155. Douglas Ross to move on up.
Moved.
Question is Amendment 169 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 169 in the name of Douglas Ross is yes 41, no 64. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 170 in the name of Rachel Hamilton. Already debated with Amendment 142. Rachel Hamilton to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. I call Amendment 171 in the name of Rachel Hamilton. Already debated with Amendment 141. Rachel Hamilton to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 171 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 171 in the name of Rachel Hamilton is yes 45, no 60. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Just before we move to the next group, Group 15, to remind the Chamber that we are running somewhat behind schedule. I will be requiring members therefore to stick to their speaking time allocations as per the timetabling motion. We move to Group 15, Electricity and Energy Infrastructure. I call Amendment 172 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, grouped with Amendments 173, 174, 175, 188, 189, 195 and 196. Rachel Hamilton to move Amendment 172 and speak to the other amendments in the group. Ms Hamilton.
Thanks, and I move 172 in my name. 172 requires Scottish ministers to establish a national energy convention to meet annually to consider the impact of proposed renewable and non-renewable energy structures on the natural environment and, importantly, hear from the local community in the areas affected by the proposed structure. The amendment also requires that the convention must include members who are representative of all parts of Scotland. Amendment 175 requires that ministers meet with regional energy groups within 1 month of royal assent to discuss and consider the impact of renewable and non-renewable infrastructure on the local area. These amendments seek to address the disdain shown to rural communities from the SNP government, who continue to refuse to meet with concerned communities who feel ignored in discussions about energy infrastructure. Last Saturday, I joined over 40 community council representatives and around 200 concerned local residents in Jedburgh to discuss the proliferation of energy infrastructure. It took a month and a direct question from me to the First Minister for SNP ministers to respond to an invitation to this convention. In declining the invitation, the response stated that it would remain inappropriate to discuss matters pertaining to live applications or proposals which come before a live application for consent. There are two issues with this response. The first, that it fails to understand that this was a meeting to discuss the proliferation and impact of energy infrastructure across the borders. It was not, as the Cabinet Secretary response suggested, to discuss specific planning applications. The second is that the Cabinet Secretary has previously
Ms Hamilton, can you resume your seat a second?
Yep.
There are too many conversations going on around the chamber. If they need to be had, can you take them either to the back of the chamber or out of the chamber? Rachel Hamilton, I can give you the time
Thank you,
back.
Presiding Officer. The second issue is that the Cabinet Secretary has previously made exceptions to this rule when agreeing to meet with network companies. For example, she has previously stated that these meetings can and have taken place with very strict instructions to those companies that no discussions will be had on future or existing planning applications. Presiding Officer, it seems to me that this is insulting to the people of the borders and across Scotland by suggesting they're unable to follow these instructions. If SNP ministers are willing to offer these terms to developers and network companies, why are they unwilling to offer these terms to the regional energy groups? In summary, Amendments 172 and 175 should not be controversial. They very simply require ministers to do their jobs by listening and engaging with residents who they are supposed to represent. Amendment 173, 174 and 196 establishes that the 173 establishes an energy planning impact assessment to assess the cumulative impact of energy infrastructure developments on the natural environment and heritage, biodiversity, the availability of good quality farmland, tourism and rural communities. This amendment also requires that they consult with local communities, landowners and others who may be affected by major energy infrastructure developments. This amendment is representative of a key ask from regional energy groups across Scotland, including the Highlands, the North East and the South of Scotland. Amendment 174 calls for a moratorium on major energy infrastructure applications until the Scottish Government publish a national energy strategy which considers the impact of energy infrastructure to the natural environment. In this case, major energy developments are defined as those which are submitted to the ECU and are 50 megawatts or larger. Amendment 196 is a consequential to 174, and again, this amendment was a key ask from the regional energy groups in the Highlands, the North East and the South of Scotland. A large number of residents across Scotland feel that the government's approach to energy infrastructure, including pylons, wind farms and solar, battery storage or substations, is incoherent and chaotic. My constituency in the Borders is facing a disproportionate concentration of large-scale projects with little regard for the cumulative impact. Communities feeling ignored, they feel powerless with decisions made by SNP ministers without any local support. And at the South of Scotland Energy Convention, communities agreed that the transition to renewable energy must be done in a way that protects our countryside, respects our communities. They want fairness in the planning system that puts their concerns and views on the equal footing to that of a developer. 173, 174 and 196 aim to redress the balance in the planning system, which for too long has put communities at the bottom of the pile. The amendments are logical. They call for a pause on major energy applications until we see a coherent and practical energy strategy. And they call for a review on the impact of the energy infrastructure on the natural environment, communities and rural economy to ensure we protect our environment. These are sensible amendments which put communities at the heart of the decisions that affect them most. Turning to the amendments 188, 188, 189 and 195 in the name of Douglas Lumsden, 188 requires the creation of an alternative assessment code for electricity infrastructure, considering how alternatives to overhead transmission are to be assessed against cost. 189 prevents the establishment of certain energy infrastructure without community support, and it is in the public interest. Finally, Amendment 195 is a consequential amendment to 189, and all these amendments have my full support. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Tim Eagle to speak to Amendment 188 and other amendments in the group. Mr Eagle.
Well, this is a rare treat for me, Presiding Officer, because in the absence of Douglas Lumsden, I get to speak about monstrous, massive mega pylons, which is always fantastic. And I'd be delighted to do so, for I have a lot of these in my area. Amendment 188 compels Scottish ministers to prepare an alternative assessment code for electricity infrastructure. Electricity infrastructure is having a huge impact on our countryside. I frankly find it ridiculous anybody would deny that. And biodiversity. We need to have clear guidelines on the technology used and the methodology to assess the technology that should be used. Energy is reserved, but planning is devolved, and the Scottish Government should use these powers to protect our biodiversity. This code would give clear guidance on where pylons can and cannot be used, where undergrounding should or shouldn't be used. It cannot be the cheapest financial option at any cost to our countryside. We are seeing our countryside change, but there needs to be a check on that pace. This code would attempt to bring that balance to the process. And my Amendment 189 focuses on the requirements of the Planning Authority to properly consult and take regard of the views of local communities. Clear approval must be sought and given for any transmission project that leads to significant community disruption or natural environmental impact. This includes energy generation projects over 50 megawatts, energy transmission projects, or large-scale battery storage systems. Applicants must provide a comparative assessment which covers life cycle costs, biodiversity net impact, impact on landscape resilience and impact on agriculture, soil and plant biosecurity. It also ensures that emergency planning is considered prior to permissions being given, with an emergency plan required and input from Scottish Fire and Rescue. If a thermal runaway incident happens, this could result in huge damage to local biodiversity. We need to understand the potential loss. These regulations would be subject to the affirmative resolution and therefore will be under the watchful scrutiny of MSPs, who in turn are accountable to their constituents and communities. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, through these amendments I hope to introduce scrutiny and accountability of energy transmission projects, allowing communities, emergency planning services, local councils and this Parliament to scrutinise the ongoing developments of large infrastructure projects that are required by our ever-growing energy sector.
Thank you, Mr Eagle. I've got two brief contributions, first from Alex Cole-Hamilton and then from Christine Graham. Mr Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. We need to...
Mr Cole-Hamilton, can you put your camera on, please?
I'm sorry, I thought that was going to happen for me. I'm very sorry. So, Presiding Officer, I'm speaking on behalf of the
Thank you, Mr Cole-Hamilton.
My apologies, Presiding Officer. A brief intervention in respect of Rachel Hamilton's amendments 172 to 175. It's really just that we need to point out some hypocrisy here. It was Rachel Hamilton's colleagues, after all, in the Conservative governments, in successive Conservative governments, who set the UK's climate targets. These are targets that have driven the changes in how our country produces energy. On these benches, on our benches, we do the hard yards when it comes to representing our constituents and those who we aspire to represent. Knocking doors, going to local meetings, listening. So we absolutely know the anxiety and concern that exists around these issues. Sadly, the Scottish Conservatives failed to lodge amendments at stage 2, so that arguments on these issues could have been debated and legislative proposals refined and finalised. Nor at stage 3 was there any effort by either Rachel Hamilton or any other Conservative to engage with other parties to find workable solutions to the problems she's identified that we understand and we recognise in these communities. If the Scottish Conservatives were serious about getting things done in this Parliament, where no party has a majority, then they would share drafts, they would talk to other parties, they would build support and put in the effort needed to make sure proposals are legally watertight. By not doing so, they've let down the communities they claim to want to help. We do need to send a message to ministers that the status quo is just not tenable. The Scottish Government's guidance on community benefit, for example, is entirely outdated. People ought to get much more when companies generate renewable power near to them. they just don't feel like they're being listened to right now. Community councils are struggling to navigate complex applications, and people are living in cold homes, including many in the Northern Isles and in the Highlands, who are in abject fuel poverty. It is an absolute injustice that they aren't getting the benefits of clean energy generated on their doorsteps. So the status quo is not an option, but the Scottish Conservative amendments today, I'm afraid, Presiding Officer, are frankly performative.
Thank you. I now call Christine Graham briefly.
Well, certainly endeavour to be brief and weary. I want to look at 172 and the National Energy Convention, and to the part at B, which says, hear from the local community in the area affected by the proposed structure, and 3, the convention, this is the key here, must include members who are representative of all areas of Scotland. I don't know who those people are. We've got community councillors, we've got MSPs, but who are these people? Are they elected? Are they self-selected? This is legislation. You can't just slap something in like that that's so unspecific and then becomes law. And the same when we go down to 175 amendment. It says, before the expiry of the period of 1 month beginning with the day after royal assent, the Scottish ministers must meet all the regional energy convention groups. Who are they? Who are these groups? Are they elected? Are they self-selected? I've got no problem with increasing consultation with communities, because there is an issue, as I've raised myself at First Ministers, about proliferation, especially cumulative of impact. But you can't put in legislation such general words, no specificity. And if I were to say who are perhaps the member will tell me, who are these regional energy convention groups? What size are they? How many are they? Who are the people? Are they elected? I'd like to know.
Thank you. Before calling the Cabinet Secretary, members will note that we have passed the agreed time for the debate on this group to finish. I exercise my power under Rule 9.8.4ac to allow the debate on this group to continue beyond the limit in order to avoid the debate being unreasonably curtailed. I call the Cabinet Secretary, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Amendments 172 and 175 from Rachel Hamilton, I want to start off by being absolutely clear that I do understand and acknowledge the concerns that are raised by some communities when it comes to the cumulative impact of energy infrastructure. For a fair transition to a net zero economy, my view is that it's vital that communities can have their say on proposed projects and see benefits from developments. That's why, where an application for planning permission under the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997 is amended, is made for development which is classed as national or major, applicants are already required by legislation to undertake formalised pre-application consultation with communities. In addition, the UK Government Planning and Infrastructure Act 2025 has recently afforded new powers to Scottish ministers to make regulations to mandate developers seeking consent under the Electricity Act to engage with local communities and stakeholders during the pre-application stage for large-scale developments. This change will ensure that all communities have the opportunity for mandated, meaningful engagement at an earlier stage and better align procedures with existing provisions under our planning system. In addition, I have already tasked officials in the Scottish Government with taking forward plans to establish a forum to better hear directly from communities as the strategic plans that will shape the need for future energy infrastructure are developed. Members will also be aware of ongoing work to refresh the good practice principles for community benefits, where I agree with Alec Cole-Hamilton. They are out of date, so I am refreshing them. There's been consulted on in a consultation last year. We published results of that in October, and my officials have been engaging with community benefit groups as part of this refresh, and I'm confident that good progress is being made. I have also asked my officials to plan a series of targeted public engagements as part of this work, so that they can hear directly from communities involved in community benefits from onshore renewable developments, and I have also asked them to organise an opportunity for me to engage directly with community representatives on the good practice principles, and I'll keep Parliament updated on those plans. So for those reasons, I encourage members not to support Amendments 172 and 175 and allow this engagement to progress. On Amendment 173, when developments come forward, impacts on communities, nature and cultural heritage, including cumulative effects, are already important considerations in the decision-making process, along with the views of the local community. All applications are subject to site-specific assessments, including environmental impact assessments where required. Consultees, including Nature Scot, Historic Environment Scotland and SEPA, play an important role in providing advice to decision-makers on potential impacts on development. And where an environmental impact assessment is needed, legislation requires the consideration of all likely significant effects on the environment, and these must be identified and assessed in the EIA report. This amendment largely duplicates these existing requirements and therefore is not needed. In relation to community consultation, I want to be clear that statutory pre-application consultation with communities is a vital and a long-standing requirement of certain planning applications made to the relevant planning authority, and this applies to development classed as national or major development. In addition, this amendment imposes obligations on planning authorities in relation to applications that planning authorities are legally unable to determine, and because the amendment seeks to modify the operation of reserved energy consenting powers, it is in any event beyond the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament. And as I said, we're already working in revising our good practice principles for energy developments now that the public consultation is closed, and these are advisory, but that's as far as the Scotland Act allows us to go. So for these reasons, I encourage members to not support Amendment 173. In relation to Amendments 174 and 196, the Scottish Government is committed to balancing the need to deliver net zero with the need to protect our natural environment. It is essential that communities are able to engage with our planning and consenting systems, and that's why we've taken steps to recently make it easier for communities to participate. We already have robust frameworks in place for assessing the impacts of energy infrastructure proposals on the environment. These are designed to ensure ministers receive the information they need on the likely significant effects of any development and on any proposed mitigating measures. This enables them to balance all considerations in the decision-making process. And as part of this process, statutory consultees such as Nature Scot and SEPA play an important role in providing advice on potential impacts on the natural environment. This amendment seeks to put a moratorium on applications for planning permission for major energy infrastructure developments. However, it then appears to relate only to developments which would be the subject of applications to the Scottish Ministers for consent under the Electricity Act 1989. Those cases relate not to applications for planning permission, but to applications for consent under Section 36 and 37 of the Electricity Act 1989. While the operation of the planning system in Scotland is devolved, the generation and transmission of electricity, as regulated by the Electricity Act 1989, relates to a reserved matter. I'm unclear as to what the amendment is trying to achieve. However, a more significant concern that I'd urge Parliament to seriously consider is whether the amendment is actually out with the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament, given it does appear to be seeking to prohibit applications being made under Section 36 and 37 of the UK Electricity Act 1989. Amendment 188 from Douglas Lumsden should not be accepted as it's fundamentally at odds with the basis of the devolution settlement regarding how Section 37 electricity consenting works. The transmission of electricity is reserved to the UK Government under the Scotland Act 1998 and the regulation of construction of overhead lines under Section 37 of the Electricity Act also relates to reserved matters. A prohibition on the grant of consent under Section 37 of the Electricity Act 1989 is accordingly out with the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament. Section 37 of the Electricity Act 1989 is a consent regime for specific proposed overhead lines, not an options appraisal framework. Applications are for a defined line along a specified route, and Scottish ministers determine whether to consent on that specific proposal as laid out in the application. They do not explore which of several alternatives should be built, as is suggested by Mr Lumsden. The amendment would require comparative assessment of underground or subsea alternatives as part of an individual Section 37 applications, fundamentally changing the nature of the consenting process in a manner that conflicts with the reserved legislation reserved to the UK Government. The Electricity Act 1989 reserves generation, transmission and distribution of electricity to Westminster. The Scottish Parliament cannot use devolved planning or environmental legislation to override or modify this reserved statutory framework, which would ultimately be the effect of this amendment. Additionally, the prohibition on consenting for any overhead lines above 400 kV until a code is approved creates an immediate moratorium on critical transmission infrastructure, which is essential for connecting electricity generation, maintaining grid resilience, and with no time frame specified for resolution. So I encourage members not to support this amendment.
As briefly as possible.
189 and 195 from Douglas Lumsden should not be accepted, as they are also incompatible with the reserved legislation. I will stop there just to say both amendments in this appear to misunderstand the reserved devolved boundary for energy consenting, so the Chamber should vote against them.
Thank you. And I call on Rachel Hamilton to wind up. Press to withdraw Amendment 172. Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll address Alex Cole-Hamilton's intervention if he's not gone shopping to get his avocados. I unsuccessfully brought forward amendments at stage 2 to review the impact of renewables and energy infrastructure on food production and the natural environment. I also brought forward a prohibition of energy developments in sites of special scientific interest, but his Liberal Democrat member, Beatrice Wishart, voted against that. I want to address Christine Graham's point. If Christine Graham had showed up at the convention, she would have realised that 40 community councillors represented 80,000 people. And if that was replicated, there's no dubiety in the number of community councillors that spoke at that convention. The convention has been replicated in the North East, in the Highlands and the South of Scotland, the areas which have had the most overturned planning applications after they have been rejected by the local authorities by Scottish ministers. So they are very representational of those individuals and communities that are being affected by the proliferation of industrialisation, as Christine Graham had described it to the First Minister at First Minister's Questions next week. I'll take the intervention.
Very briefly, Christine Graham.
I wasn't invited to the convention. If I had been invited and had been unable to attend, remember I wasn't invited, I would certainly have sent my apologies, but I wasn't invited.
Rachel Hamilton, and begin winding up.
So Christine Graham, I'm sorry that she wasn't invited. Her colleagues, her two SNP colleagues were there and they didn't sign a unified statement. But if I go to the Minister's comments, I want to thank Gillian Martin, first of all, start off with a positive note, because I am glad to hear that there's going to be mandated engagement. I think that is a step forward for the SNP. I'm also really pleased to hear about the good practice principles, and I'm pleased to hear that there will be greater community consultation. And I know that people who are watching this right now will be really pleased with that. I think the disappointment that I feel about the government not accepting these amendments is that there is no recognition of the number of planning applications that were rejected by the local authority on renewables that have been overturned by Scottish ministers because of the concerns of the cumulative impact. And it seems as though when I look at the excuses that the Scottish ministers give, that is because their obsession with net zero, and their obsession with net zero is overriding the concerns of the community and the cumulative impact. And I think we need to be very, very careful how areas like the Borders, the Highlands and the North East have been affected by this. Thank you.
Just checking, you're pressing the Amendment 172. You're pressing the Amendment 172?
Yes.
Okay, the question is that Amendment 172 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division of members who cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 172 in the name of Rachel Hamilton is yes 24, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 173 in the name of Rachel Hamilton. Any debated with Amendment 172, Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 173 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division of members who cast their votes now. And the result of the vote on Amendment 173 in the name of Rachel Hamilton is yes 23, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 174 in the name of Rachel Hamilton. Already debated with Amendment 172. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 174 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not agreed. There will be a division and members who cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 179 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, is it 174, sorry, in the name of Rachel Hamilton is yes 24, no 80. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 175 in the name of Rachel Hamilton. Already debated with Amendment 172. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 175 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division of members who cast their votes now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 175 in the name of Rachel Hamilton is yes 24, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Before moving to Group 16, I am going to suspend briefly for 5 minutes to allow members of the Bureau to meet outside the Holyrood room in order to discuss progress with dealing with amendments. We are suspended for 5 minutes.